Welcome, everyone. As we get started today, I want to take a moment to warmly welcome you, our listener.
Yes, absolutely.
I want to offer a sincere divine blessing for your day and for the week ahead of you. May you find clarity, peace, and a really grounded sense of purpose in whatever challenges or, opportunities you are facing right now. We're absolutely thrilled you are joining us for this deep dive.
It is genuinely wonderful to have you with us. We have some truly fascinating, historically rich material to explore together today.
We really do.
Right.
Today, our mission is to journey into one of the most dramatic and pivotal moments in ancient literature.
Exodus chapter 34.
Exactly. And to guide our exploration, we are pulling from the extensive study notes of two major Portuguese biblical resources.
Right.
We're looking at the Holman Study Bible and the Nova Almeida Atualizada, or the NAA Study Bible.
Now, you might be wondering why we are leaning on Portuguese translations and their accompanying study notes for an English discussion.
Yeah, it sounds a bit counterintuitive.
It does, but it's a great question. Sometimes looking at an ancient text through the lens of another language, it unlocks nuances and cultural resonances that we easily just gloss over in English.
Oh, for sure.
The scholars who worked on these specific translations highlight linguistic footnotes that completely change the emotional weight of this narrative.
Exactly. And to set the stage for you, we need to remember exactly where we are in the story.
Right. The context is everything.
We all know the basics of the golden calf disaster and the shattered stone tablets.
The ultimate ancient disaster.
Seriously. But today, we are skipping past the initial anger and the immediate fallout. We are zooming in on the morning after.
The messy part.
Yeah. The mission of this deep dive is to explore, well, how do you actually renegotiate a covenant when the original contract is literally in pieces on the floor?
The huge question.
What do the boundaries look like when trust has been utterly broken? And on a purely physical level, what happens when a human being gets a little too close to the source of reality?
It really is the ultimate case study in a second chance. But if you dig into the historical footnotes here, you quickly realize this second chance comes with an incredibly heavy atmosphere.
Heavy is definitely the word.
It is not a simple, lighthearted reconciliation.
No, not at all. Moses is essentially told to chisel out two new blank stone tablets, just like the first ones, the text says, and he has to hike all the way back up Mount Sinai.
Alone.
Alone, at dawn. You can just feel the chill in the air.
Yeah.
He is walking back to the site of this massive cosmic revelation, carrying these heavy stones and carrying the psychological weight of his people's monumental failure.
And this is where the NAA study notes point out a crucial detail about the environment of this second meeting.
Okay.
The parameters established here are almost shockingly strict. In Exodus 34, verse 3, the command is that absolutely no one can come up the mountain with Moses.
Which makes sense, given what just happened.
Right, but it goes much further than that. No one can even be seen anywhere on the mountain. And not even the flocks or herds are allowed to graze in front of it.
Wait, which is wild to think about. God essentially puts Mount Sinai in a hard lockdown.
A complete lockdown.
You know things are bad when even the livestock are put on probation.
Exactly. The notes emphasize that this is a significantly more rigorous restriction than when the law was first given.
Right.
It is a total geographical quarantine of the mountain. And this extreme boundary serves a very specific purpose.
Like a visual aid.
Yes, it acts as a stark visual warning. The geography itself is communicating that trust has been profoundly broken. The space between humanity and the divine has to be managed with absolute, terrifying reverence right now.
So Moses is up there. He has the newly chiseled stones. The mountain is completely silent and quarantined. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, this is my favorite part.
God descends in a cloud and stands there with him. But instead of showing Moses a physical form or demonstrating some massive show of terrifying power,
Which is what you'd expect.
right, God does something entirely unexpected. He proclaims his own name and his character.
And this is one of the most profound theological pivots in the ancient world.
Yeah.
The Holman Study Bibles lean heavily into this moment. They point out that in contrast to earlier chapters where we get these massive, overwhelming visual descriptions of glory.
The thunder, the lightning, the smoke.
Exactly. Here, God offers a list of what the scholars call invisible qualities.
Invisible quality.
In a time when ancient gods were seen as petty, transactional tyrants waiting to strike you down with lightning, this is a massive theological plot twist.
It really is.
The creator of the universe introduces himself not with his power level, but with his patience.
I love how the notes describe it as the central confessional declaration of the Old Testament. It's essentially God's mission statement.
Yes.
It's the core bio he wants attached to his name for the rest of history. Compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in faithful love and truth.
And both the Holman and NAA Bibles highlight a fascinating mathematical imbalance in the exact wording of this character reveal.
Oh, the generational thing.
Right. In verses 6 and 7, God declares that he maintains love to thousands of generations, but visits iniquity or consequences to the third and fourth generation.
Wait, hold on. I need to push back on this for a second.
Sure.
If God's default posture is this overwhelming, merciful love, why does he still threaten to punish the third and fourth generation? It still sounds pretty harsh and unyielding to a modern ear.
It's a really valid question, and the commentary clarifies this beautifully.
Okay.
The text isn't saying God holds a grudge for 4 generations. It's acknowledging a profound truth about human behavior.
Which is what?
That the consequences of deep rebellion and destructive actions are real, and they inevitably ripple out to affect our immediate descendants. A family's destructive choices impacts the kids and the grandkids. That's just the reality of cause and effect.
That makes sense.
But the contrast is the key. Thousands of generations of love versus 3 or 4 generations of consequence.
Oh, I see. So the ratio itself is the point.
Exactly. The notes explain that this massive mathematical imbalance fundamentally emphasizes God's grace and clemency over his judgment.
Yeah.
The consequences of a fractured relationship are real, but the timeline of grace is practically infinite by comparison.
The timeline of grace, that fundamentally reframes the assumption people usually have about ancient texts, where the expectation is just strict, unyielding punishment.
Absolutely.
The text is mathematically proving that grace outweighs the anger. And Moses immediately recognizes this because his reaction is to just hit the dirt.
It drops right down.
He bows down to the earth and basically says, "Yes, Lord, we are an obstinate, stiff-necked people, so please forgive our iniquity and take us as your inheritance."
Which brings us to a brilliant insight from the Holman notes regarding Moses' negotiation strategy.
Yeah.
If you look closely at Moses' intercession, he offers absolutely zero proof that the Israelites have repented.
Huh. He doesn't pull out a spreadsheet showing a 10% decrease in idol worship.
Not at all. He doesn't present a 10-point plan for behavioral improvement, and he certainly doesn't promise they will never mess up again.
Right.
The notes highlight that Moses banks the entire future of his people solely on the grace and fidelity of God.
Wow.
He is essentially saying, we are entirely a mess, we are stubborn. And because we are stubborn, we desperately need a God who is exactly as gracious and patient as you just described yourself to be.
It's an incredibly bold move. It's like saying, we qualify perfectly for your compassion because we are so deeply flawed.
Precise.
But even with all that grace established, the text makes it clear that the relationship still needs firm ground rules moving forward.
Yes, very firm.
The narrative outlines some very strict new covenant conditions. They are commanded to tear down foreign altars, smash sacred pillars, and make absolutely no treaties with the inhabitants of the land.
No Canaanites, Amorites,
Yeah.
none of them. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the notes provide crucial context for why these rules are so uncompromising.
Okay.
It hinges on how God describes himself in verse 14, where he says his name is jealous.
Which always sounds a bit strange to us.
It does. Now, here is where our Portuguese sources really shine. The NAA translates this as zeloso.
Zeloso.
Right. When we hear the English word jealous, we usually think of a petty, insecure human emotion. But the notes explain that zeloso carries a much deeper connotation of fierce, protective care over a relationship.
So it's less like a jealous teenager and more like the fierce protection of a marriage vow.
Precisely. The term highlights a vigorous affirmation that God protects the integrity of his relationships. It's an exclusive covenant.
Yeah.
And the text deliberately uses the derogatory concept of spiritual prostitution to describe the act of the Israelites worshiping other gods or participating in pagan sacrifices.
Because it's a betrayal.
Exactly. It's not just breaking a legal statute. It's a profound, intimate betrayal.
Which perfectly explains the zero-tolerance policy for making treaties or keeping the old pagan altars around. You wouldn't invite the person you had an affair with to move into the guest room while you're actively trying to repair your marriage.
That's a great analogy. And the study notes add a highly specific, almost chilling linguistic detail here that really drives the point home. When God gives the command in verse 17, do not make cast metal gods for yourselves, The text uses the exact same Hebrew word for metal that was just used to describe the golden calf a few chapters prior.
Oh, wow. So it's a direct callback. That is definitely not a coincidence.
Not at all. It is a highly targeted warning. The text is essentially saying, do not repeat the exact specific disaster you just walked away from.
Yeah.
It's bringing the reality of their recent failure right back into focus to ensure they don't do it again.
The ultimate too soon reminder.
Absolutely.
So we have these massive relational and geographical boundaries set up, but you'd think after giving them all these massive cosmic rules about worship and exclusivity, the text would stop there.
You would think.
But it instantly zooms in on the nitty-gritty of their daily planners. The covenant outlines these fascinating, very specific, sacred rhythms.
Yes, the daily ritual laws.
It rapidly fires off rules about observing the festival of unleavened bread. There are rules about redeeming the firstborn.
Which includes that wild stipulation.
Yes. The rule that you must redeem a firstborn donkey with a lamb, and if you don't, you have to break the donkey's neck. Which just sounds incredibly bizarre.
It does sound bizarre and quite harsh, honestly.
Yeah.
But the study notes provide the economic context here.
Okay, lay out on me.
To redeem essentially means to buy back. In the ancient agrarian world, a donkey was your tractor. You absolutely needed it to work the land and survive. God is establishing the principle that everything firstborn belongs to him. But because you need this donkey to survive, you are allowed to buy it back from God by sacrificing a lamb instead.
Ah, I see.
It underscores the absolute nature of the dedication required. There are no loopholes. You either acknowledge God's ownership properly, or you cannot benefit from the animal at all.
That makes so much more sense when you realize the donkey is basically their heavy machinery.
Yes.
The text is just packed with these rhythms meant to dictate how they farm, how they eat, and how they live. There's even the famous prohibition against boiling a young goat in his mother's milk.
Which is another moment where historical context is everything.
Definitely.
The notes explain that boiling a kid in its mother's milk was a specific Canaanite fertility ritual.
Oh, wow.
By expressly forbidding it, God is telling the Israelites they must separate their daily rhythms and agricultural practices from the surrounding culture. They cannot rely on pagan magic to ensure a good harvest.
And speaking of the harvest, that brings us to what might be the most challenging daily rhythm of all. The Sabbath command.
The command to rest. But if you look at the specific phrasing in verse 21, it doesn't just say take a day off.
No.
It commands rest on the seventh day, but adds, even during the plowing season and harvest, you must rest.
To stop working during the harvest? That is huge.
It is a massive demand. The notes explain the profound trust this requires. Think about what a harvest is in the ancient world.
It's everything.
Exactly. Resting when it is economically the hardest and most stressful time of the year is terrifying.
Yeah.
During harvest, every single hour of daylight is money. It's survival.
Yeah.
If you see a storm coming on the horizon, leaving your crops in the field for a whole day because it's the Sabbath could literally mean starvation for your family that year.
So to stop working during the harvest is to completely surrender your economic security to God. It's saying, I trust that following this sacred rhythm will sustain me more than my own frantic labor.
Precisely. It's a weekly physical test of the new covenant. Are you relying on your own hands to save you? Or are you relying on the God who just redefined himself as gracious and providing?
Okay, let's unpack this climax to the chapter because it is easily one of the most famous and visually striking moments in the whole narrative.
It's iconic.
Moses has been up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. The text specifically mentions he had no bread and no water. He finally comes down carrying the new, heavy, chiseled tablets.
Yeah.
And he is completely unaware that the skin of his face is literally radiating light. The Portuguese sources use the word resplandecia. It was shining brilliantly.
And the reaction of the people is immediate and visceral.
Huh?
Aaron and all the leaders of Israel see him, and they are terrified to approach him.
Which is completely understandable. The guy goes up a mountain for a month and a half and walks back into camp glowing.
It's deeply unsettling. And the NAA notes make a brilliant psychological connection here.
Okay.
They point out that the terror the people felt toward Moses' glowing face is identical to the sheer terror they felt toward God himself back at Mount Sinai when the law was first given amid thunder and lightning.
So they are looking at Moses, but they're reacting as if they are standing in front of the divine glory that they know they just offended with the golden calf.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Moses has been so close to the source of reality that he has absorbed it, and it is leaking out of him in a way that people simply cannot handle.
Wow.
Their fractured state makes them hypersensitive to that level of purity.
So Moses has a major logistical problem. He has to lead these people, but they are too terrified to look at him.
Right.
He ends up putting a veil over his face when he is talking to the camp, and he takes the veil off when he goes into the tent to speak directly with God. He becomes this constant mediator managing the intensity of the divine presence.
This raises an important question, of course, which is why this physical detail matters so much to the broader narrative.
Yeah, why include it?
The Holman notes dive deep into the theological implications of this veil. They suggest that it served a very specific dual purpose.
Okay.
First, it was a practical barrier. It protected the people from lethal exposure to God's glory. Because they were in a sinful, unreconciled state, unmediated contact with that level of holiness was genuinely dangerous.
Right.
It's much like trying to look directly at the sun. You need eclipse glasses to protect your eyes.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. The veil is the eclipse glasses.
Yes. But the second purpose, according to the commentary, is that Moses' glowing face served as undeniable physical proof that his intercession on the mountain was actually successful.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
Because Moses went up there not knowing if God would truly accept them back. The fact that he comes down radiating God's glory is the ultimate proof that the connection is still alive. God hasn't abandoned them.
Exactly. The Lord had agreed to go with the Israelites in a way so deeply gracious that they could safely experience his glory through Moses, despite their own arrogant weakness.
That's beautiful.
The NAA notes add another layer to this, pointing out that Moses' shining face acted much like the pillar of cloud over the tabernacle.
Like a beacon.
Yes. It was a temporary, physical sign to the people that God was actively speaking to him. It validated his leadership right when the nation was at its most unstable.
A visible validation of his authority.
And the scholars highlight that this exact scene becomes the vital background for the Apostle Paul's later writings in the New Testament.
Right, in 2 Corinthians.
Yes. Paul uses this entire story of the veil to make a massive theological point. He contrasts the fading glory of Moses' ministry, a glory that required a veil and eventually faded from his face, with the permanent, life-giving ministry of the Spirit that believers experience later.
Yeah.
Paul argues that this new covenant operates with unveiled faces because the transformation is internal and permanent rather than external and fading.
It's amazing how this one deeply physical moment on a mountain sets up theological echoes that reverberate centuries later.
It really is.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, today?
A lot to process.
Yeah, we've covered a shattered contract, God's core bio of patience, the mathematics of grace, extreme quarantine boundaries, agricultural trust falls, and a glowing face.
We really ran the gamut.
We did. I think the core takeaway here is that encountering the ultimate source of reality changes you fundamentally. You don't walk away from that kind of presence unaltered.
No, you don't.
But equally important is the realization that the entire foundation of moving forward after a massive failure relies entirely on grace, not human perfection. Moses didn't negotiate based on his people's flawless track record. He just trusted that God was fundamentally merciful.
That is beautifully summarized. The text insists that true reconciliation doesn't just ignore the brokenness, which is why the boundaries were so strict and the laws were so demanding.
Right.
But it also insists that the defining characteristic of the divine is a willingness to forgive and rebuild, maintaining love to thousands of generations.
It's a powerful, challenging framework for thinking about trust and repair in our own lives. And before we go, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over.
I love these.
We talked at the very beginning about how God told Moses to cut the second set of stone tablets himself.
Yeah.
The text tells us that God made the first set entirely. But the second time around, Moses had to go to the quarry, chisel out these heavy stones, and physically carry them all the way up Mount Sinai completely alone.
Which in the ancient world is an exhausting amount of physical labor.
Exactly. Think about the intense physical sweat of that memory. Moses is breathing hard, chiseling rock, carrying the literal weight of the new covenant up a mountain.
Yeah.
Could it be that the physical, exhausting effort of creating these second tablets was a necessary part of the reconciliation process itself?
Oh, that's fascinating.
After the ease with which the people broke the first covenant, perhaps making the restoration a shared, laborious effort between humanity and the divine was the entire point. We tend to value what we sweat for.
We absolutely do.
Just something to explore as you think about how we participate in rebuilding the things we've broken.
That is a phenomenal thought to end on. The labor of restoration is truly a shared endeavor.
Well, that wraps up our exploration of Exodus 34 for today. Thank you so much for diving into these incredible study notes with us. God blesses all the listeners. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you on the next deep dive.